Sharma.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. This is thrilling for me. I just can't wait to get talking and hear your thoughts, hear your questions. So thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And we have Eric and Keswa with us today. And just to get the ball rolling, we'll have Eric to start with the questions. Eric?
Okay, thank you, Jay, and welcome, Sharma. It's a pleasure to see you and to be a part of this interview. So
Thank you.
let's get rolling here. Um, without creating any spoilers, do you care to say whether the central mystery of the novel is resolved in your mind, or do you waver from one conclusion to another?
I love that. So just to clue
Cheeky
others in,
question there.
yes, to clue others in, one of the central questions is Apollo son? So those who haven't read the book, 18 years before the book begins, Dinah, who is a Jamaican helper, gives up her baby in an informal adoption to her then employers, who are an American couple living in Jamaica. They promise to take care of the child. She doesn't have any support. She's young. She agrees. They promise they'll keep in touch, and then they don't. So fast forward 18 years later, she's working with a different Jamaican family who are entertaining their friends who are an American couple who bring their son, Apollo. And she sees him and she's convinced, this is my boy. This was a baby who I named Son and gave up, who's now come back to me. And the real answer is, it seems like a cop out, but it's open to interpretation. I mean, I think there are so many clues either way, where he could be or he couldn't be. And I really want the reader to draw their own conclusions, because when I shared it with friends, I had half of them convinced, yes, Apollo is Son. The other half saying, you guys are crazy. It's a different person entirely. And I think that's the beauty of how I wanted to write it, to have you guessing, have you thinking, and also as the course of the novel evolves, to also think, well, maybe it doesn't matter so much because she becomes a mother figure to him. He acts as a surrogate son or a son figure to her. And yes, I really want readers to come to their own conclusions on that one.
I'm pretty sure as more people read it, there'll be 1,000 different interpretations about that whole that whole plot line.
Yes. And I want that. I want the furious debates about who Apollo really is.
Thank you so much and welcome, Sharma. It's lovely to have you with us. I've really enjoyed your novel. It was such a page turner. I went through it really quickly. Absolutely desperate to find out what was going to happen, who was going to happen to who, what was going to happen to who. But as Eric's kind of suggested, that motherhood is a real central theme in the novel, but I think it challenges a lot of our ideas about what a mother is and who can be a mother. And there are lots of different types of ways of mothering as well. I think that book is really, really strong on that. But one mother we don't see a lot, and there are a lot of mothers, a lot of the characters, we know them both through themselves and through their relationship with their mother, right? We know Gina's mother, we know obviously Dina's mother, and Dina is a mother. I'm not going to keep going, but there are lots. British's mother is even in there, right? So even the area Don has a mother figure that is important to his storyline and his growth as a person. And I like the way that's done a lot. But the one mother we don't know much about, and I have a question about, is Kathleen. Who is Kathleen? Right, she's the one mother we don't know a lot about. And can you tell us, is there a reason why we don't know about her? Can you tell us more about her? She's a fascinating figure because she shapes so much of what happens in the story without even really being present.
Yes, so Kathleen is Damien's mother. So for those who haven't read the novel yet, he's one of the people who live in the tenement yard that Dinah lives in. So basically like a housing complex in the inner city. And he helps shape a lot of the action in the novel. Won't say much more, but he becomes a friend to Apollo. And they're friends of opposites. You have a wealthy Black American privileged kid, and then you have an inner city kid. They're about the same age, but in life experience, very far apart. So Kathleen left when Damien was a boy, around 12. And the reason was, at the time, there was a lot of political upheaval, and she in those Garrison communities, you can only vote for one party. If you vote for another, you're at risk. And so she was subject of a rumor where someone else said, oh, to the area dons and the leaders, hey, she voted for the other side. And so she had to basically flee Jamaica to run away to America and left Damien. And Dinah kind of stepped in a way to start to try to mother Damien. I don't say much about Kathleen, but the Kathleen experience of leaving your family, going away is very much a common thing in the Caribbean and definitely Jamaica. And a lot of those children become barrel kids, you know. Every month you get the barrel, or every few months you get the barrel with the ivory soap and the, you know, all of those things. And unfortunately, in Damien's case, none of that happened. So the mystery is she went away, she wrote him a letter, and then we never hear of Kathleen again. So we don't actually know what happened to her. But again, just like the other characters, her absence creates a mother wound for Damien, you know, the sense of, how could you have left me so suddenly? And I don't know what happened to you, you know? Is it that she went over there, she started a new life, forgot about her son, or did she fall into some kind of, you know, something bad happened to her and she's no longer alive? And so I also don't know. I think people think that I'm not a planner. You know, there's some writers who know everything. Okay, this is what it is. When I'm writing a novel, I'm as surprised as you half the time. Like I may have an idea of what I think is going to happen, and then I'm writing it, and then the character is literally saying to me, "No, I wouldn't do this," or they surprise me as the writer about the things that they do. So Kathleen, I don't know what happened to Kathleen. Her story is one of those haunting mysteries, and Damien's grappling with it led him to, I think, make some really bad decisions as a young man.
And would you say that, like, in terms of sort of creating this if I could call it imagery in the book, or, you know, where you have this, where the reader thinks, is this real, is this imagined, did you deliberately go about doing that, or as you said, did it just pop up as you wrote the book?
Yeah, I find that I like mysteries. You know, I'm one of those people, I watch like investigation, discovery, and murder shows, and I try to figure it out before it's revealed. Like, I think there's a part of me that's naturally curious, and I like to work things out. And I think the thing about this novel is it intrigued me that I couldn't work everything out, you know. And I like the fact that people can draw their own conclusions on different things, and even myself, sometimes things I thought were the case, afterward I'm like, actually no, I don't think it's the case. And so it surprised even me, and that's the kind of experience I want readers to have as well as they're reading.
So it
It's
seems
full of
like,
mystery.
yeah,
Interesting.
so it seems like you put yourself in the position of the person reading the novel, rather. I mean, you definitely, you're the author, you're the creative, but you're also putting yourself, okay, if I'm reading this, you know, how would I process all of this?
Yes, and the things I write things I would want to read. Like, I write things that, like, I love a book that you have to grab me from page one. If you don't get me at page one, I'm likely not to continue. I can have a shorter attention span. I may give you a couple chapters, but I like things that grip you. I like things that draw you in. That's the kind of things that I was deliberately even telling this book in Pata, which is Jamaican language, and mixing some standard English in it, telling it, some of it chapters are first person, some are second person you know, like, I wanted to play around because it kept me interested in the writing, and it's also sort of, I've never read a book like this, I'd like to read a book like this, it's told in this way or this unusual way. I'm in so many heads, I'm head switching, and I just wanted to explore and see how that would be, and to say, okay, this is something I'd like to read. So that kind of process is what kind of informed or shaped the book to be how it was.
No, I definitely love the ensemble nature of the novel, that there are so many different people talking, but they all live and have a kind of common thread, that they're all part of this community, Lazarus Gardens or Jack's Hill, and that interaction between them is the central story in the novel, right? Behind, you know, that, which, you know, that's the fabric on which the rest of the story lies, should I say. I was really intrigued by what you said about a mother wound, that idea. Or could you say more about that concept? Because I think actually when you said it, as soon as you verbalized it, I was like, that's something that is also runs through the novel, right? But I've never heard it before. Could you say more?
Yes. Well, I just thought of it, but I guess there's a way in which the presence or absence of your mother makes some kind of wound, or gives it some sort of shape. I think there's a part in the novel where Diana talks about, you know, everybody having a wound in a certain shape, you know, that's almost like a tattoo. And so these characters, whether consciously or unconsciously, they walk around with their life bearing a pain tattoo that's in the shape of the mother that was gone, like Damien's case is Kathleen, or in Diana's case, Mama, who was a very harsh mother who was there, who didn't abandon her, but raised her in a way that she thought was toughening up Dinah, but actually caused more pain for Dinah. It was a total departure from how Mama herself was raised by her mother, who was more nurturing, more kind, but she was sheltered. And not to give away events of what happened in the novel, but because of Mama's own sheltered upbringing, she experiences a trauma or sexual assault, you know, because she's not thinking of the world as a place that can hurt her. And she goes to the next extreme by raising Dinah in a way that she thinks, I'm toughening you up. I'm going to be harsh with you. I'm not going to allow for any softness. So I guess, and as you said, even the Eridan, whose mother, Miss Ivy, you know, could see him for his sociopathic tendencies, but still was saying, okay, you can still be an impactful man. Like, so I think, you know, it's there's a way in which mothers, everybody's mother, whether they're present, they're there, cause some kind of impact, and some of it highly traumatic. So that's why I said, you know, motherhood.
And well, I just sort of want to go like just before Kesu asked her question in terms of like the different narratives presented in the novel. One aspect of it that I found intriguing was the Ghetto News Network, the GNN.
Oh.
And I was wondering, you know, what was your thought process in including that? Do you think maybe it could have had more prominence in terms of telling a lot more of the stories in Lazarus Gardens, or what are your thoughts on just including the Ghetto News Network?
Yeah, it could have had more prominence, but then you see, a lot of things about this novel had to trim. It's a big novel. It's thick. It's like over 400 pages. So my great editor, Rose at Virago Press, trimmed down some parts and we expanded some parts. But the Ghetto News Network is basically the way in which in inner city communities news gets communicated over zinc fences, to pieces of board, and to all of that. And so I thought of it as an alternative to CNN, you know. It's like real news, street news. You're the hairdresser, you know, you have that reporter telling you, hey, this is that. So it's a reflection of the way in which the communities' lives are so enmeshed, and, you know, their stories are so intertwined, and how, you know, when one incident happens, it ripples throughout and gets repeated and gets added to, and there's stories that, you know, just permeate that whole setting as well, and that whole community. So I could have used it more, but it would have been a way not longer novel.
Oh yeah, before I ask the next question, some of us wanted more of the GNN.
Oh,
because those vignettes was so funny. It was so funny, but they were funny because it was so real. I think all of us who grew up in the region, or even like me on the outer edges of the Caribbean, we all had this in our communities, and we know the people who spread the news,
the correspondence, and
those segments really grip me and had me laughing out loud. Okay, the next question we have. There are certain places in the novel in which Apollo has some ill-conceived ideas about Jamaica and or Jamaicans. One section in particular, I'm just going to name the page range, 143 to 145, where Apollo and Regina are having cross-cultural misunderstandings. I think this is the scene where they're sitting in a fancy restaurant. Here's the question. Are you pointing to the limits of Pan-Africanism?
Oh, that's a deep question, and that implies I'm some kind of deep philosopher, and I won't pretend to be one. What I would say is that there is a way in which, for Black poor Jamaicans, especially in that time, it may not necessarily have resonated in the same way for Black Americans. And it comes down to even the idea of poor in Black American and poor in Jamaica. And, you know, you could be poor in America, and it means you you don't have gas for your car. You know, in Jamaica, the car is not even a concept if you're poor. And you know, yes, we want Black empowerment and so on, which Apollo spouts a lot. But then Regina is a really star, saying, you know, yeah, Black empowerment is great, you know, but then what about food or you know, the things that you need for your daily sustenance of life, you know? You can't keep your high ideals if it doesn't put money in my pocket and if it doesn't put food on my table. And so she takes a different view, Regina, his girlfriend, from Lazarus Gardens, and based on her own life experience and her own lens. But I wouldn't be purporting to make a grand statement about Pan-Africanism. I'm only speaking that there may be limits in how it's perceived by others from a different context.
Okay, I think I got one follow up on that. Apollo is what, 18 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you purposely make him naive about Jamaica, about Jamaicans themselves? Because he seems to have an idealistic notion of both the country and the people themselves.
Yeah, that was deliberate. Apollo is clueless a lot of the times in the novel. A lot of the times I feel like hitting him upside the head and saying, "Get with it, guy." But you can't really blame him. He's still a kid, and he, based on the way in which he grew up, he just wasn't ready for manhood, I don't think, although he may think he is. And the journey he makes by the end of the novel takes him a little bit closer to being the kind of decent man that Dinah would like him to be. But he was also very hard to write because he's one of those characters who isn't in touch with who he is. And so, as Dinah would have said to him in one scene, like can become different things to different people depending on his context, but not really true to himself because he doesn't know who he is.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I have is that one thing I kept thinking about in terms of the Apollo character is the context, the setting of the novel, and it seemed like early to mid '80s, and you know, for me growing up in that era, this was right before like a blossoming of Afrocentrism and culture, where we had more an awareness of the diaspora, more of the awareness of Africa and trying to be African centered. So I'm wondering if that context played into how you shaped Apollo, because again, as we said, he seems to be clueless sometimes.
Yeah, but I guess growing up in a largely white society, he would gravitate naturally to anything that is Black, anything Afrocentric, to distinguish himself from his others around him. However, the issue I think is that for him, a lot of things are very theoretical, and I don't think that the practical realization of what some of these things mean really hit home for him, you know. And he, as I heard in an interview you had last week, the review, very paternalistic. So he, you know, offering money, and yes, Dinah would want the money, but there's more, you know. He sort of comes in trying to think he can save them, and you know, realizing that he has that mindset, not because he wants to save them, but because he wants to look good and because it would make him feel about himself. So he's at heart very selfish, very self-centered. And throughout the novel, I try to challenge that, to push him past that, to actually start thinking about other people genuinely and not just as some philosophical ideal. Because he loves the idea of Jamaica as this independent Black country, but at the same time, you know, he can't really see them as people for who they are, you know, which is why he would criticize them to, like, why are they always having all these kids and you know, in inner city and begging and this is that. Like he sees them through a very American white privilege lens, even though he is a Black man.
Okay, good, thank you.
It's interesting as well you say that, because I think my question speaks a little bit to the same sort of thing, but sort of differently, if you like, which is that it's a really interesting choice that when Apollo arrives in Jamaica, even though he's spending his time doing an internship in a prestigious uptown law firm, in his personal life, he's kind of hanging out with these Lazarus Gardens youths. And he clearly feels an affinity to them. He enjoys their company. They kind of accept him, even if these terms are not always equal. Is there something in that? Why is it that he kind of lives in these two worlds quite, and within himself, even in Jamaica, where he has the opportunity to pick a team, to be whoever he wants to be and just be that person, he's still kind of wavering. Is there something about Apollo's personality as well as the kind of background that he's had?
Yes, so he wants to be around Lazarus Gardens people because he recognizes that they have something he doesn't have, a kind of certainty about themselves, a realness in a way that he can't relate to. And so he wants to belong. That's his overwhelming driving thing. He wants to belong somewhere, to some group of people. And, for him, Lazarus Gardens, he starts to see them as people who, they know who they are. They know where they stand. They're just being themselves. They're just doing life. I mean, there's a chapter, I believe he goes in and he's like taking photos and writing them down like he's on some kind of nature show and observing, people out in the wild. Because I think he instinctively knows, even though he's an outsider, he's on the periphery of something that is so real and something that he in a way envies, the sense of they are who they are and they really don't care. They don't have to grapple with issues of identity. They're just doing life, they're just being themselves. And there's something about that he finds very appealing.
And maybe even a bit liberating.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And to give you a bit more insight into why Lazarus Gardens is the way Lazarus Gardens is, we're going to now have a reading by Sharma Taylor.
Much later, after everything had unfolded, MP Sims will recall this conversation with Dinah. At the time, he had thought that the woman was too naive. The wheels of progress had to keep turning. Some people were bugs on its windshield. She didn't understand that sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. British maintained order in Lazarus Gardens and ensured it remained a party seat. And he knew that anything that helped put and keep the party in power was good for the Jamaican people and the future of the nation. It was as simple as that. The logic was unassailable. So what if British was a bit exuberant? When he heard she had lost her steady job, MP Sims had considered giving her work cleaning the party office, but decided against it. There should be no reward for trying to upset the apple cart. That behavior could not be encouraged. Dinah was at best naive or at worst unpatriotic. Sims had been a politician for many years. He considered himself a veteran. He studied international politics. He understood the complexities of the Cold War, knew about the South African apartheid that led Nelson Mandela into prison. Jamaican politics was different from American or British politics. Here, as an MP, you couldn't drive through your constituency just waving hello and leaving it to the government to provide the social infrastructure. No, sir. The government had no money to spare, and in Jamaica, it was understood that a man was giving you his vote to be his MP in exchange for something. And if you wanted it again at the next election, you had to make sure you provided what you promised. So you had to get out of your car and stand in the heat and dust and listen to what he wanted. It wasn't just about the curry goat and rum you had to give out at election time, or the work to build roads or clear sewers or cut grass along gullies. What was the real price of a vote? Each thing was specific to that man, but it involved the same things: food, education, security, the health of his family, the welfare of the children, and the environment in which they lived. Each man cared about what mattered to him. Some men would tell you they can't eat education, give them food. Some men wanted education so they could get food forever. Sims once had a man who called himself a die-hearted party supporter, living in one of the hotly contested marginal constituencies tell him the night before an election that he needed the road to his yard. Here. But the election is tomorrow, Sims had sputtered. The man had calmly let him know he would not get his vote without a road. So Sims bought the cement and sent some men to start paving the road that night. How Sims saw it was that a man without light in his house can't watch TV. If you don't send a drum of water to his house, the man can't make himself a little tea. If you don't buy marl for his street, he has no road. If he doesn't live anywhere, the man is relying on you for a decent house. You have to send his children to school. That means uniform, school fee, bus fare, and lunch money. You have to give him money for his mother's diabetes medication. If a man loses his foot in an accident, you as MP have to give him back a foot. Artificial, of course. As MP, you are part of the domestic affairs in his yard, and you have to take care of all those affairs. So to get the people's vote, you promise them something that is directly affecting them. And if they don't get it, there will be no vote at the next election, and you will have to hide from them. And no MP's salary could cover these unending needs. That's why MPs had to hustle and engage in what Sims thought of as extra income earning opportunities. Taking a little bribe here and there, dipping into money from foreign governments for grants and aid, redirecting funds from one source to another, falsifying the budget, getting a secret refund on part of government contracts that had been awarded. All because Jamaican people depended on their MP for daily sustenance. And to a great extent, in respect of the Lazarus Gardens community, Sims had given over this role to British. He thought of it as delegation. British was ensuring everyone in Lazarus Gardens had their needs met so they could vote for the party. So what was a little bloodshed to keep the wheels of progress lubricated and turning? What was a little lawlessness to keep the overall social order? That was Sims' thinking as he reflected on his meeting with Dinah. He would later regret he had not listened to her.
Thank you very much for that reading, Sharma. And in that reading, we heard about Wendell Sims, who was the MP for the area for Lazarus Gardens. So by portraying Sims in the book, was there some sort of political message that you were trying to send, or I don't know, a statement that you were making?
I try to avoid statements in my writing. I just want to tell my story. Well, the character stories. It is important to note, though, that the book is set in 1980s and set in the aftermath of political turmoil. And even the cover of the book, half green, half orange. Orange is the party color of one party, green is the color of another. And, politics shapes a lot of the lives of the people in Lazarus Gardens, because it's the protection of political power that gives rise to these area dons. And the area dons need to also earn money, so they have to get into crime, drug smuggling, guns, and so on, and fueling that further fear of ever going against the party, once you live in these Garrison communities. So they're interlinked. I couldn't have told the story without bringing in the party, so bringing in the crime. Although I would tell you earlier versions of this book. So it at one point the manuscript won second prize in a first novel prize competition, and one of the reviewers was like, she'd be more fascinated if the book was entirely about Son and Dinah, like just have it be a mother-son story, forget all the others. And then I'm like, no, like the heart of it is, yes, it's a mother-son story, but it is also about this particular time, this particular place. So I've had to try to balance the telling of the mother-son story with it, without it becoming like The Godfather or descending into some crime, shoot him up kind of thing. But I really wanted to tell that part of the story as well.
2 weeks ago in our review, I said that without Sims, British, and someone else, Davis, there wouldn't be What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, a big part of driving the action, for sure. And especially since when Apollo starts to visit Dinah in the community, and the Eridan gets fascinated, this young bright boy, he's going to be a lawyer. My current lawyer is not acting right, not acting in my interest. And so he sees him as somebody he could groom into his criminal organization, because British the Eridan sees himself as CEO of a company. He's ahead of his time. He's not just a gangster, he's a businessman. And so he could see an opportunity in recruiting Apollo, which of course Dinah doesn't want. And so, and of course the Sims, who is the MP, also needs the Eridan but wants to keep him in line too. And then the Assistant Commissioner of Police, Davis, started trying to balance it now, because he has to be accountable to the MP, but he also needs to ensure that, again, British doesn't get out of line too much, because he is supposed to be the enforcer of law and order, being the legitimate cop, but yet he's sort of given up power to British in relation to Lazarus Gardens, that police stay out, have a hands-off approach. But how feasible is that when things start to go crazy in Lazarus Gardens? And that's one of the driving, trigger events, I would say, in the novel.
Yeah,
Eric, you seem like you want to jump right in.
yeah. It's about Dinah in particular. I was arrested by her her devoutness, her piety, but she was quite strong. Did you draw on something to infuse her character with that intense Pentecostalism that she had?
Yes.
Went beyond the church too, because when she confronted people.
Yes, I live in a country where we have the greatest number of churches per square mile, I think, in the world. Like, there's a church pretty much on every corner in Jamaica, right? So we're a highly religious society, but then we're also very violent, which is a sort of tension as well, right? So she's like women I know, so that's what I drew on. And I wanted to really be true to her beliefs. And, yes, she's a believer, but Apollo is agnostic, but that she tries to draw him into that, that life, because she feels, okay, I want to impart this to my son. And the reality is, in Caribbean societies, a lot of people grew up in the church. You may have a different view on it now, but at least certain principles would have informed you. And then for her, I think religion became her lifeline. Having lost Sonson, I'm sorry, this was the thing that kept her together, that kept her going, that kept her from sinking. So in a way, the community around the church, the people in the church and the members, really kept her afloat in the wake of that trauma.
Good. And I felt, as I mentioned, I felt that I connected to her. I'm not Pentecostal, but I connected to her because she seemed real in that sense. She seemed grounded in that sense. So just a little nod there for that particular accent in her life and in that character.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question that draws on kind of both of those two questions, really. It's about the naming of some of the characters. So we have Regina, we have Damien, we have Apollo, and there are other names as well, but those three kind of in particular. Is there something of Greek tragedy or biblical drama that you're pointing to with these names that have kind of big meanings?
Definitely. So people can Google Dinah and Apollo and kind of see that story. But I think for me, as a writer, one of the hardest things is to give your character a name, because I'll sometimes write and the character's name will change like 4 or 5 times. And so sometimes in earlier draft, when I give it to people, they're like, well, who is this person? Because I don't see this anywhere. And it's like, oh, I needed to edit that out. That was the former name of one of the characters, because I think, names have meaning, they have weight, and especially when there may be things that I may not be saying about the character, but it's how to in the name, like Damien for me kind of connotes something almost, there's other kind of sinister thing, but about the name Damien, and again, I think very deeply about names for characters, because I think, yeah, names have weight and tell you a lot about them without coming out and exactly.
In which case, a follow-up question is, what does it mean that the area Don's name is British?
Well, I'm not trying to say anything about colonial.
Say what you need to say. I'm a historian. We're keeping to facts here.
No, but he spent a lot of time in England, right? But again, you could take it from the other, the deeper meaning to okay, British colonialism. But he's just known as that because when he comes back, he's sort of, known as that guy who was, in England for a while. In the same way, if he were in America, he'd be like, it's a Yankee, yeah, in a way. So that's that. His original name was Iceman, incidentally, but I changed that. The suggestion of my editor.
No, I thought that choice was good too, because of him being away and then coming back. I mean, that's what the neighborhood does. If you're from somewhere, you've been somewhere, you come back to the neighborhood, they'll call you where you were. If I knew somebody in my neighborhood who went to Kansas City, he comes back and says, "Hey, what's up, Kansas City?" and blah 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 blah. So that's real. That's black.
Very much so. I'm really sorry. I have one more follow-up question. Everyone's gonna hate me. I'm just taking all the time. One more question that's follow-up. It's slightly different, but slightly similar. You said you're trying not to make a political point, and that's fine. I mean, we like a political point on this show, but it's fine. You don't have to make one if you don't want to. But I will ask you, one of the things that is perhaps surprising about the novel is characters that because you set this really clear picture. You paint a really clear picture of a community. You get the sense that it's long-standing and long-term, but then you flip something that we think is infallible and going to happen and definite. You do that a couple of times, actually. Maybe that's part of the way you tell stories. It's quite exciting for a reader to follow. But the question I'm going to ask, that's easy for you to answer, is, or I hope it's easy for you to answer, is, do you think Jamaica is always going to have garrison communities and area dons?
As long as the politics stays how it is, I think, yeah. And I think you find that if you grow up seeing this as a way of life, it is going to become the way of life of your children and your children's children. These entrenched communities, not just about the buildings, it's not about the complexes that were built where people stay. It's also a way of thinking. It's a mindset, and it's even in middle class communities sometimes. So you associate green with the Jamaica Labour Party, orange with the People's National Party. Sometimes you may be wearing a orange blouse to work, and somebody make a comment, say, "Oh, you're showing your PNP self today, or you're wearing green," and it's different because in my mother's generation, in her family, you had people who were PNP, JLP, and you go to all the rallies. Even if you were JLP, you go to the PNP rally and so on. And it was fun, and yes, you'd tease each other, but it was never serious. It took a sinister turn in the 70s, 80s, given everything happening in the bigger political space of America. America's fear that Jamaica become communist because of our relationship with Cuba. And so, sanctions came in and interference came in the economy, and sort of advancing of one political party over the other, backed by, American might and resources. And so I think then it became a real life and death kind of struggle now, this sort of power, the stakes were higher, and there was more bloodshed as a result, and yeah, we're not how we were before in the 80s, but there's still that sense of danger around certain things and certain things that sprung out of those garrison communities. Because frankly, there are places in Jamaica I don't go, and many middle-class Jamaicans don't go. If we were to go there, we would very much have our lives in danger because we're outsiders. We're seen as, could you be coming in from the other party? You have streets where right beside each other and lanes in fighting with each other, just a few meters away from each other. If you cross the street, your life could be in danger. So I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, that is still a part of life in Jamaica. It's not the only thing about life in Jamaica, but it's something that I don't see changing in the near future, unfortunately, because of the entrenched ways of thinking about those things.
It's something that we really draw out in the book, the interdependence of these different sort of moving parts that create the situation.
Exactly. And to think about it, if I'm an area youth growing up in Lazarus Gardens and let's say I don't do well in school, or the area Don's business is they're my employment, they're my future employment. So they want to recruit people. They want me as a young man to be part of their organization. It challenges them if I decide, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an accountant, I want to be something else and leave the community. It's a challenge. They want people to stay in a certain framework so that they can ultimately use them towards their own ends, and so it is built in keeping you at a certain level. Yes, they'll have shining stars, you can be a track star, you can be really bright and they give you some deference. But for the most part, the bulk, you find you have more people who fall into, okay, this is what I know, this is what I'm going to do. And that's sort of dependency, as you said. I don't think about me supporting myself. It's about going to the area and getting what I can get, and sort of not learning self-sufficiency. But I wouldn't want to make a statement to suggest that it's everyone in those communities, because they're not monolithic. But I would say that a vast majority have that view, unfortunately.
And so that makes me think: is the character Dinah symbolic of a way out of these garrison communities? Because here's Dinah, confronting British, confronting Sims. I'm not sure if she confronted Davis, and then there are certain characteristics to Dinah that sort of tell me that she's protesting life in a garrison community. She's not representative of what we think stereotypically of life in a garrison community. Even with her cooking up a storm for Apollo, it gives you the impression that all hope isn't lost in the garrison community. Not everyone in the garrison community is indigent. So would you say that she's symbolic of breaking out of those barriers?
Yeah, in garrison communities, there are different points of light. People like Dinah, she's not the only type. So she is a representative of a type, yes. And as Apollo himself discovered, they're people just like everybody else. There's they have their own joys, their own hopes, their own dreams, their own fears. They're people in every sense of the word, but there is a way in which, in the same way Regina has this grand idea for her boutique and all these things she wants to do, and she has her dreams, there's sadness in the fact that for many of them that those dreams will never be realized. It's sort of, you have an idea in your head of what you want to do, but yet the choices you're making daily are leading you further away from that, leading you toward in her case, being used by men to get money, which would lead to other things, So it's sort of, you have a sense of that dichotomy. I have my dreams. Damien wants to be the singer, all these things that they want more for themselves, which is great. Some realize it, but far too many don't, So I wanted to bring that home in the novel as well.
No, and that's one thing that just resonated with me throughout the whole story. Again, the closest thing that I could relate to in terms of those tenement yards, housing projects that were ubiquitous in New Orleans. My parents both grew up in housing projects, and over time, those projects just deteriorated, not just the buildings, but also the level of violent crime. And you couldn't go just into any project from the outside. What we call, you had to have a pass, meaning you had to know somebody, you had to have family members who were there that let you in, and you were basically protected. That was my connection into that world in Jamaica that you portrayed. So I think from an African American perspective, African American readers would read this and say, "Oh yeah, this is reminiscent of life the way a lot of us grew up."
Yes, for sure. And you may say, well, Sharma, how you know these things about Garrison communities? You don't live in a garrison. I never grew up in a garrison, but we had maids, in my family who came from communities like this, so who knew these kinds of things, who would talk about these kinds of things. So in a, in a real way, that was my in to kind of hear and to understand and to know. And my mom taught for many years in a school in the inner city. And so, knowing what it's like when kids couldn't do their homework because they were under the bed because gunshots were ringing throughout the night and that kind of thing. So I can't pretend I grew up there and know everything, but just through knowing people who have lived there, who do live there, who still live there, and what they've gone through gave me, this insight into being able to write this novel.
Just as a similar question, really, do you think you'll face backlash, or have you already faced backlash for people suggesting that you don't have the right to write the story about a community you don't come from? Were you worried about that at any point?
No, not worried. I mean, people may comment that way, but I guess frankly, as a writer, people are gonna say whatever they want to say about anything, right? Like, you can't be too worried. I do want more people from inner city to write stories, write their own stories. But the sad reality is they don't have the education or the opportunity to do so. And so the fact that I do, and I try to render their lives as faithfully as I can. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say about that.
Sorry, a quick follow-up question. I think it's important for viewers to understand that the story is less really in some ways about the Garrison community and the people that live in it as it is about the contrasts, right? It's about the contrast of the different people that all claim Jamaicanness and to be operating in Jamaica's best interests in lots of ways.
Yes.
Right? That's how I read it anyway. I think it's. Would you say that's a fair description? And was that important to you as well, to make sure you're not telling just a story about the ghetto or someone from the middle classes, but perhaps a story about the contradictions of wealth and extreme poverty, about the ways that shaped opportunities and lives?
Yeah. And as I said, though, I have to be fair that when I'm writing it, I'm not thinking about all those big ideas. It's like maybe in editing or rereading, I'm like, oh, okay. But to be honest, Jamaica is a land of contradictions. You have very wealthy people here, extreme wealth, and yet extreme poverty as well. And so you see that every day. You see the luxury cars on the road, you drive right past the Jaguars, all the high-end cars, and yet you see people on the roadside lying on cardboard on the sidewalk too, right? So it's like that's the country I live in. That's the country I live in. There's just a big contrast, a big gap between rich and poor, and it's almost like we're in the same country, but we're in different worlds, and different worlds are coexisting on the same piece of rock.
And unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. So very briefly, I would ask you, what is next for you? Are you working on something new? Any insights you want to give us?
Oh, what's next is I want as many people as possible to read this book, and I'm glad, as again for this opportunity. I do have other novels that I'm working on. Probably more along the kind of mystery line. Remember, I kind of hinted like I love to watch murder mysteries, so I will see how that goes. But I'm always writing because that's how I think. That's how I make sense of my world. If I don't write for a period of time, I feel like I'm going crazy. So always working on something, whether it's a short story or a novel in progress. So I'm really hoping that in another couple of years there will be, another book out. My publisher have a 2-book deal with them, so I do have the second novel that is being edited now, and I hope people are gonna love that as well. It's very much a departure from this book. So yeah. But I can tell you there's a murder in it. There's a big murder that's, yeah. And then the mystery around what happened around that is as well.
Well, I don't have permission from the rest of the Page Turners Plus crew, but I'm sure we would love, just as we are with this one, to be among the first ones to review your next novel.
Sure. Page Turners Plus is like family now. Like, of course.
Yes, we are always open to free copies. Thank you once again, Sharma, for joining us.
Caribbean writers, and we're all about supporting Caribbean writers and writing.
Yes. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much, Kessie.
Right.
Thank you once again for joining us. This has been another episode of Page Turners Plus with Sharma Taylor herself, author of What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.